Okay, so we've made it through the skeletal system, which is one of our biggest ones, but now we're going to get into our next biggest system, and that is the muscle tissues in the muscles. For this chapter, for chapter 9, we're going to get into skeletal muscle and muscle tissue in general and just kind of talk about how it works before we get into the chapters that come afterwards where we're actually looking at the muscles on a larger scale. So what are we trying to accomplish here? We are going to look at the organization of muscle tissue. We're going to remind ourselves about skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. That should be somewhat reviewed, so we'll go through it relatively quickly. We'll talk about how muscles work, especially with the tendons to move the body, and then get into muscle contraction and relaxation. And lastly, we'll talk about some of the development and regeneration of muscle tissue. So let's go ahead and just kind of have a review of muscle tissue. So we should be able to identify the different types of muscles. We're also going to get a little bit into contractibility and extensibility, so our ability to contract and or extend or relax. So if we remember from histology, we have 3 muscle types that we see. There is skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. Right? And no matter which of these we're looking at, we have the same basic characteristics in all muscle tissues, and that's excitability, which means they're going to receive a signal and they're going to react in response to that. Elasticity, extensibility, and contractility, so our ability to move, right? To extend out, to contract, to move. These are the characteristics of all muscle tissue, and this is why they can do the function that they are given, which is to allow movement on a grander scale. So again, another reminder, this is a nice little table that can help you with identifying muscle tissue types as well as some information about them. So we have our 3 types, skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. If we look at each of our columns, we're looking at striations, whether or not we have a nucleus or what type of nucleus we have, and then regulation. So let's start with skeletal. When it comes to striations, we do have striations. That's not unique to skeletal, but it is a key thing. If you see striations, you know you could be looking at skeletal muscle. And when it comes to the nucleus, we are multinucleated, meaning we have lots of nuclei, right? We're looking at lots and lots of nuclei. And so that would be the one giveaway for skeletal muscle, is the multinucleated appearance. We can't see this under a slide, like a preserved slide, but something to think about is skeletal muscle is voluntary, meaning you have conscious control over whether or not you contract that muscle. Right? You can choose to extend your arm, you can choose to bend at the knee. Right? Those are actions that you can consciously be aware of and decide upon to complete. Versus the other 2 muscle types, which are both involuntary. So if we're looking at cardiac and smooth, both of those are involuntary, meaning there is no conscious control. And that's a good thing, right, for cardiac and smooth, because you would not want to have to be consciously aware of your heart beating or your food moving through your digestive system all the time. I mean, we're talking even in your sleep, right? So it's good that we do not have voluntary muscle for cardiac and smooth, that those are involuntary. When it comes to cardiac, they do have striations, and so this is why striations alone are not enough to tell us what type of muscle we have, because we see striations in multiple types. But the one big thing is that the cardiac muscles only have 1 or 2 nuclei, so they don't have that mess of nuclei that the skeletal muscle has, so that'll help make that distinction. Some other things we don't have up on here just yet includes the presence of intercalated discs, which we see in the cardiac muscle, as well as some branching. We don't see branching in skeletal muscle, but we do see it in cardiac. And then lastly, we get to smooth. Smooth, the striations does give away smooth, because smooth does not have any. And so because there are no striations, if you see that, you know you're dealing with smooth muscle. They also only have 1 nucleus, just like cardiac can. So here's our muscle tissue types in their pictures, and so we've seen this picture before. We have skeletal at the very top, labeled A. We have smooth in the middle, and then we have cardiac muscle at the very bottom. And so if we're looking at the skeletal at the top, we see like there's a lot of nuclei. We can see those striations. It's very long and lean and thin looking. When we look at the smooth muscle, we see there's only 1 nucleus per cell, we do not see those striations at all. And then when we look down at the bottom of the cardiac muscle, we see there are striations, but the nucleus is pretty much just one, maybe two. There's some faint intercalated discs that we can see, and then we do see some of that branching happening as well.